went to work with to help put the Pepsi story and the Dimich story on Community 7. So there's kind of a legacy there for you. And we thought the same type of setting would be wonderful for tonight. So tonight's going to be part of an interview with both of them talking about, and also a slideshow to kind of enhance the program. So I want to introduce to you now Nancy, Willie's daughter.
Short. Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you to Renee and all of you for inviting us here this evening. It's a real honor to be here, and also an honor to introduce my father, William Dimich, or Willie, or Bill. He goes by several different names. Each name identifies him with a different part of his history. That makes sense because history is very important to him. His formative years were spent in the colorful, cultural patchwork town of Red Lodge, Montana, during the Depression and World War II. I'll share some of those colorful stories with you this evening. He was supposed to pursue a career as a history teacher, which he did start in Roundup, Montana in 1956. And his passion for history was the catalyst for getting this book published. My dad's history in Red Lodge influenced my life in a lot of ways, especially through the stories he told and the people that I met. I even got married in Red Lodge 30 years ago this summer, with 40 French people coming for the wedding to my French husband, who's here this evening. But the greatest impact my father's life in Red Lodge had on my life was when it came to going to college. I had been accepted by Princeton University, but I was hesitant to go because it was so far away and it seemed very intimidating. My mother refused to give her opinion. She wanted me to decide for myself. But my father, very uncharacteristically, had a strong opinion. He said to me, I grew up watching those guys from Princeton come out for the geology camp with their fancy clothes and their fine cars. And I think you better go back there and find out what it's all about. So I did. But I don't want you to think that my father spends all of his time looking back. No, each day when he goes to the Pepsi plant, he looks ahead, which is a good thing, because he's driving a forklift loaded with pop. Even in this sub-zero weather, even on days like this, he goes down to the plant and gets on number 3 and drives around, as folks here who work with him can attest, because the word retired just isn't in his vocabulary. Please welcome William Dimich.
You got it. Okay, Willie, I'm going to give you the first shot here. I thought it was Billy. Well, Billy and hold that up tight.
I had 3 names growing up, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first one, my birth certificate says Vladimir. Now, some of the Yugoslavians named their kids Vladimir, and they went by Vlado. My mother called me Billy because she couldn't say W's. And so I grew up with a Willie, and when I went in the service, Willie didn't quite sound what I was going on. So then I became Bill, and I can always tell when I come back to Montana who knew me in Red Lodge and who knew me in another life. I have an opportunity tonight to introduce a family friend and an old Pepsi friend. If you open your book to page 52. Are we ready for the introduction of my friend Bob Repack, Party Pack? Bob, would you stand up? Bob is in that picture. He's 17 years old. And he's my brother Danny. He's 91 years old and the oldest alumni for the Pepsi-Cola Company in Red Lodge. A little quick note, Bob's godfather was my dad, and the thing that Bob always addressed my dad as Coom or Kumala or Coom. That meant godfather, and he always addressed my dad as Coom. which was quite an honor for him. Bob, thanks again for coming. It means a lot to me. The truck, the picture is my brother Danny. He was the only one that didn't go in the service, and he ran all the routes with people like Bob. The truck he's standing by was a 1939 GMC. We bought it new. It was good enough to leave Red Lodge every morning at 7 with Bob and my brother Danny. Took an hour and a half to get to Billings. First off was Joe's Market Basket. Each case weighed 42 pounds. And they all had to come off that roof. And Bob would hand them down to Danny or get them off by himself, and if he missed it, get hit in the face with a case. The case truck fully, we had to make sure, at that time in our life, there was a scale house in Rockville, and you didn't want to be overweight coming down the road. We're 93 years old in the soft drink business, and I had a handout as we go along, and my dad buys this business in 1926 from Charlie Wilson. Those of you know Red Lodge, this building was right across the street from the city bakery. It was later torn down, became a drugstore, and now is a antique store. The business was a card room and a lot of different things. But my dad buys this business in 1926. We had a grocery store that went into bankruptcy. And the two things that were different very quickly, when we had the grocery store, you stood behind the counter and looked out the window. And when people came in, they charged everything. And nobody paid cash or waited for the husband to come in to pay the bill. Everybody had a little book in the store. We had a dance floor on the second floor. In a minute. And we always enjoyed it. So I've been told, hit the hook.
I've got pictures of this stuff. I tell you, our Montana has a little program on Community 7, and I had the opportunity to interview Willie on that. It was so much fun, and we really do like history stories there. And I was so impressed with this Montana story about an immigrant who comes into this country, and the family over many decades have had this business that's been so successful here in Montana, and the relationship with the family. I think it's just one of the really neat stories. And I think most of you got a book here, and I want to read you one paragraph out of that. And I'm going to try not to wrestle this microphone out of Willie's hands too much without me. Okay, that first paragraph says, the story of Pepsi-Cola Bottling Company of Billings, Montana is the story of Mike Dimich and how he risked everything by traveling to a new country to make a better life for himself and a future family. In this process, he built a business that has lasted for over 90 years, going on 100, Billy, and provided his family a life that they would never have had if they stayed in Croatia. His courage and his determination are the foundation of Pepsi-Cola business that he created. And I think this is a real American story. And I think you're going to have a treat listening to Willie a little bit more on this. Willie, I'd like to start with your dad a little bit. And would you tell us, let's see if I get this to work. I'd like to start with your dad.
Thank you, Mike. My dad was born in the country of Croatia in 1892. And he grew up in a very small little village, Ostrovitz. All there was is a post office and a telephone on the outside of the post office. I went there a couple of times. Ostrovitz wasn't much, but Croatia had a city of Zagreb, or Gospic, thanks, man. And that's 15 miles away, and that's where, if you wanted to go shopping, you had to go that 15 miles. He told me when he came, many times when I'd ride with him, that he came to Red Lodge in 1910. We looked up the history, and he arrives in Ellis Island in 1909. So he's off a little, but that wasn't too much. And then I said, hey, Paul, when were you born? And he said, I don't know. And he said, well, how about Columbus Day? He says, how about October 14th? Columbus discovered America, I discovered America. So, we always kind of, because he never did know when his birthday was. And so he gets to Ellis Island, and backing up, the railroads were building and they needed laborers. So they would buy your ticket on the steamship.
Here's a picture.
Oh, okay, it's the ship that it came on, we found that in Ellis Island. And he's comes over to Ellis Island, goes through all the process, and he is hired by the railroad. And one of the things they say, you have to go to Chicago to get your job. And for some reason, when we found the manifest, they all put down they were farm hands. We think that must have been the railroad's idea. So we worked, there's a picture of the, yeah, that's a ship. Pretty crowded.
Did your dad tell you anything about this trip over?
Yeah, you had a 6 foot long, 2 feet wide berth, and everything you had on that trip was you, and everything you had in a suitcase or a whatever sheet or wherever you could get on. Food was bad. It was a long, I think he said about more than 5 days, but getting off the ship at Ellis Island was finally when that happened, why he got into on his way to the U.S. He gets into Chicago, gets his job as a section hand for the Northern Pacific Railroad, and he eventually, with his brothers, ended up in the coal mines of Red Lodge, Montana, which were owned by the railroad. And it was a railroad town. They had 2 mines, and they had about 1,500 miners 24 hours a day on 2 shifts, 3 shifts off of Red Lodge, one right as you came into town to the left, and one on the right.
They had 2, they were mining coal for the railroad then, weren't they?
Yeah, the railroad owned everything. That was, they owned the town. And but yeah, I'd ride with my dad a lot of times, and he'd tell me stories about when he came to the U.S. And we just became, you know, with that many hours. I think the reason he took me on the truck was he'd fall asleep. And my job was to poke him. And he always smoked a cigar, and sometimes the ashes were about 2 inches long, and then he, when I woke him up, he'd have to brush him off, and maybe a little spark there that would burn his shirt or something. But I think my main thing was to keep Pa from falling asleep. And he was the world's worst driver. I can remember we had an old Dodge, and he'd line that hood ornament right over the center of the line, so we had a wheel on each side of the white line, and then he'd move over and then go back. I don't know how we ever made it, and then nobody could pass it, so people honked over. He would look in the mirror and stay right where we were, but we'd go, we'd ride with him from dusk to dawn. The only thing I ever really got to know my pa was last Saturday of every month he would tell me to get in the truck with him, and we go down, and my job is to do the counting for the inventory. And you have a slip in your paper about what we bottled, and that's his writing in 1938. My job last Saturday of every month was to walk down each row, count how many cases of orange left, how many cases of grape malt. Then I'd holler it back, and he'd record it. And then we got all done, why he'd go back to the office and make the recordings and get ready to order for next week. The difference in that business that we were in at that time, there was no credit. So when you ordered for next week or next month, everything had to have a check with it. And we got big in the candy business. And as I told Nancy,
I'm going to have some pictures on that.
yeah, Nancy said, tell us more. Well, here you are, I'll shut up. Well,
Hey, I do want to go back to the coal mining a little bit.
yeah, well, I'll shut this one down. We sold a lot of cigars, and Bob will tell you, we used to break open a box and smoke them. I don't know what we ever thought we were doing, but we sold, I don't know, every guy in Red Lodge must have smoked 6 cigars a day, but then we moved to Billings, we still sold a lot of M&Os and dry climate cigars, and after fashion, cigars went away, and but we never sold cigarettes, but we sold tons of cigars and candy. And one of the funny things, when we were going into a drugstore to sell the candy, they'd say, "What do you got?" You say Hershey's, and then you'd say, "And they got nuts too." And we'd all giggle thinking we said something really rowdy. and all look, and then we wait for a chuckle to say, "Isn't that funny?" And they say no, and we go on. I'll give the microphone back.
No, tell us a little more about the mining there.
Oh, well.
What'd your dad say about that?
The mines were, we call the east on the hill going over to Bear Creek, and then the other side was the west side. And my dad told me he worked on the west side, which is about 2 blocks where the Civic Center is now. And his job was to go in the tunnel with his, he had 3 brothers, and you had pick the coal out of the seam, put it in cars, and then they had animals to bring the, you see in the picture, mules to bring the coal up, and then they dumped the coal in a tipple. And right where the Civic Center now is, the train would back up, they would drop the coal in the car, and then the car would head on back to Billings or Laurel. Yeah, and in 1912, fortunately, he writes the date of the year in February
1912.
17th, which is what, 2 days from now. So in 1912, he had this picture taken, and I think he doesn't stay in the mines about 3 more years, and then he and his brothers get out and pick a little store downtown called Daylight Groceries, and that's the end of his coal mining. And on the right side, why?
Yeah, this is such a neat picture.
Yeah.
He's got a bow tie on.
Well, I think it's more for.
This must have been his first day at work.
Well, studio. I think there was a studio that would take your pictures.
And I think I see a watch fob here.
Yeah, so a little of a costume, I would say.
It was the union uniform, Bob says.
Well, uniform, okay, well,
Union
okay.
uniform.
yeah. So anyhow, fortunately for me, they did date it, and that was probably the best thing out of the whole picture.
Tell us about this crew of people here.
Okay, don't want to drag this on too long.
Oh, yeah, we do.
Well, as Nancy and I were talking, this is a pretty distinguished group of young men. They were in the 20s, and my dad is the first seat on the left. He was the shorter of the group, and on his other side would be my Uncle Mitch. They're both sitting there, and my Uncle Mitch was a real grouch. I can remember him bouncing on his knee, and I don't think I ever saw him when he wasn't a grouch. Now the guy behind him was my Uncle Emo, and he was just the opposite. He was a big extrovert, and you couldn't get him to shut up. And then the other brother right behind the two his name was Pete, and he was always a clerk in the store. He was more of a shy introvert, and he would run back and forth. And a lot of the things that came out of our grocery store are still in the Emporium candy store in Red Lodge. So if you ever walk in and you see a bunch of these things where we used to keep beans and stuff in. And then the man that was right behind him, excuse me,
I'll go back.
he was my mother's cousin. He was a boarder. He lived in our house, and he worked in the mines, and his real name was Mike Odonovich, but we called him Ujak. It was kind of one of those things that Ujak in Yugoslavia was uncle, so we'd say Uncle Ujak, and we were saying, but he was a real prince, and we consider him a member of our family. But many winters, I'd have to sleep with him, and he used to like have a shot of whiskey before he came to bed or more. And if you rolled over and breathed on you. But we didn't have much heat upstairs, and so my job was to go short beds. You go up and sleep with Ujak girls.
No, here, hold tight.
Your
Willie, did your dad and his brothers always get along well? They must have.
Yeah, they did. They were kind of easygoing guys. I don't think I ever heard any of them sound off. No, they were easygoing. Two of the four ended up moving to California and never to come back. Mitch he said, I never left anything in Red Lodge, I'm not coming back, and he didn't. And this, my brother Emil, his brother Emil right behind him, real quick, he didn't speak English or didn't understand it too well. And during lunch hour, he was sweeping the white garage, which was just off of Red Lodge Main Street. And a guy came in with a gun and wanted to hold up the garage. And my Uncle Emil didn't understand, and the guy shot him in the leg because he didn't know what he was supposed to say. And when he got healed up, he was, I'm going to California. And he never came back. Pete stayed to be a clerk, and Uyok stayed and lived with us until he did go back to Yugoslavia to end his life there. And I went back to see where his headstone was and all, because he was really close to all of us. And yeah, they got along good. Maybe there's a picture a little later of,
I think.
yeah. Wedding, I get different dates. My dad always said 1914. I think we looked it up and it was 1913. So he couldn't give you the right dates. My mother is, I think, about 18 years old. My dad's probably about 20-some. And the best man is his brother Mitch on his left. And then a cousin. And then my uncle, Emil. Then her brother who gets killed in the mine. Cave-in, and then on her right was the godfather of the Serbs named Kiteman. And anything you wanted to know, you went to Kiteman for advice, and that was kind of like he cleared the air. And then of course Mrs. Kiteman, but they got married in I say 1914. Then the family starts growing quickly. Can you?
Yeah, tell him, how did your dad and your mom get together?
Oh, maybe that was overlooked. One of my dad's friends, and he's on the manifest, he's 40 years old, his name is Teslich, befriended my dad and said, I have a sister back in Croatia, her name is Sophie, or Sophia. Is that right, Nan? Sophia? Anyhow, they thought they'd make a good couple, the two men, so they write a letter, send the money to get my mother over, and she and her girlfriend, she's going to marry another Serb, Bonjevic. And the two gals don't speak English, get on a train, go to Sheberg, get on, come over and get in through El Salad. Can you imagine two girls, 18 years old, can't speak the language and come all the way to Red Lodge? I grew up in a family where mother and father would speak Serbian, and I never caught on, but my older brothers and sisters did. And very quickly aside, the book's dedicated to my mother Sophia and my dad Mike. But I want to dedicate this to my two sisters, Mary and Mildred. They were beautiful sisters, and my three brothers, Danny, Mitch, and Emil, because they spoiled me. I mean, my feet never touched the ground. There's a picture of that's before I'm born. Always make fun. I guess I can do it with you guys. My brother Danny always had these ears that kind of come on, and my brothers used to tease him. And then in front of him is my brother Mitch, and then across is my sister Mary, my brother Emil in the forefront, and then my sister Mildred. And this picture was taken about 1926, I believe. And my mother was her class act. She always dressed the best that she could, and so that's our family, less Willie.
She didn't go back until when? When did she go back to her old country?
Picture up on the screen is at 1932. She's going back to the old country, and she missed her family. And she wanted me to be baptized in the church in Zagreb, or Croatia, Gospic, thanks, man. anyhow, we go back, and that's her family, and I'm being held by my uncle, that's his wife, two brothers, and my mother's brother, my mother and her mother and father, her sisters, and ironically, those people in the front row, you wouldn't believe it. I got back to Yugoslavia in 1980, and those two girls in the front still remembered the day that the American kid was baptized, boy was baptized in the Eastern Orthodox Church in Gospic. And it was for me to remember, but they remember the clothes they wore, because they got to have dresses and all, and it was a big event. My uncle had a business, and they must have had about 250 people come to my baptism in Yugoslavia at that time.
Willie, here's a picture you haven't seen. So take it. Would you tell it? So when did your dad get out of the mine? How did he get out of the mine and get into the grocery business?
Oh, yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that you didn't want to be in that mine too long because your days are numbered. I think the biggest fear was a cave-in, and that could happen in your. And they had a lot of. If you read the histories of cave-ins in the two mines, and that doesn't count Bear Creek and over the hill, so that weekly men were getting killed from cave-ins, and I think my dad had a little leadership, and they had a house behind the store. The bar's called the Blue Ribbon today, and they lived in the house and bought this little store and got out of the mines. So they got out of the mines about 2 years after he got here. I had a handout, and I'll try to keep this in line. It's 1926. My dad realized that the grocery store business was going down the tank, and he buys this business from Charlie Wilson. That building's right across the street from the city bakery in Red Lodge, and it was kind of an ice cream parlor, and people would come in and have sundaes and all. And he keeps that building until 1932, and then he changes the whole thing. He moves to the north end of town and changes the name from Red Lodge Beverages to Beartooth. And then in 1937, we become the first franchise bottler of the drink called Pepsi Cola. So then we changed the name for the third time to the Pepsi Cola Bottling Company of Red Lodge.
What about the parades? The parades that he organized and the letter from the president?
This is 1917,
Yeah.
and I think that parade story is a good one.
Well, I think we had somebody in the room and might even had a grandparents that lived in that building. Is that right?
That's right.
So Renee's ancestors, that's where the railroad families lived, on the second floor. And I still remember those people that lived up there. Trains were the only way you could get to Red Lodge easily, and it took you, I don't know how many stops you had to, every time they had a milk can, the train stopped, but 2 trains a day came to Red Lodge. And so in the beginning of World War I, Woodrow Wilson was getting not much support, but some, and he wanted to make a decision to send troops to France. And my dad organized all of the Serbs, and I remember the harness he used to wear. It was kind of a leather thing with the 2 pockets, and he would parade with the Serbs down the street of Red Lodge to give Woodrow Wilson to know that we were supporting, or they were supporting, the Serbs who were part of the beginning of World War I. It was called the Balkan states, and it was a firecracker to go off, and it did. All over some killing of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife in Serbia. But the train depot was the busiest place, and of course, when I grew up, things came up on the train. But I think looks like a parade going.
Got flags up. You guys your dad got a letter from the president.
Oh yeah, Wilson writes him a letter on the White House. I remember somehow it never got quite saved, but It came from the White House in Washington, D.C., and addressed to my dad, thanking him for his support of the troops going to France and supporting his ideas and all. So, yeah, the letter was personally signed by Riddle Wilson, and I wish we could find it.
How did you guys get into the Pepsi business?
Well,
Use the mic.
any questions?
When you ask, use the mic, we can't hear you.
I asked, when did you get into the Pepsi business?
Okay, real quick, and my brother Mitch was a student at the school called the Poly. That's where the street comes off. It was called Polytechnic, and he was going to come back to Red Lodge one afternoon, and the bus stopped at a hotel called the Grand Hotel, which is now where Jake's downtown. We went down to the Grand, waiting for the bus, and while he's there, I overheard a conversation between two fellows about why are you here in Billings, and Mr. Jones says to the other fella, I'm looking for franchise bottlers of a new drink called Pepsi Cola. Fortunately, my brother had enough brains to go over and introduce himself and said, my dad has a business in Red Lodge and about 60 miles away. And Mr. Jones comes up, talks to my dad, says you can become a franchise bottler if you give us a check for the concentrate of about $375. And you can have Pepsi exclusive for 6 counties in south central Montana. He took the deal, gave the check, and we were then that was March of 1937, and we bottled our first bottle of Pepsi in May 4th of 1937. And we really start going.
That's for your ads.
Well, yeah, we finally had ads for the grocery store, Daylight grocery store. And the way they did it, a lot of times my dad and his brothers would knock on doors to take orders for the grocery store. And then Emil, my one uncle, would drive the truck, and then they would take the product or the order to people's homes because they had no way of getting there. So I think probably that was one of the ways that people became acquainted with our company, or their company, was you got, like today, you got delivered to the house, but you get the order one day, deliver it the next day or the same day. But they had one truck and they delivered groceries up and down the street, and even went over to Bear Creek in a town called Washoe. It isn't even there. And that's how they made the living. That was pretty good for about 4 or 5 years. They built a building. Does that come up, Mike?
Yeah, we'll have that in there. I put this picture in there. That's
My brother Dan.
Danny, and a Serbian.
Yeah, when we went to my baptism, my brother Danny, he could speak Yugoslavian, he could understand it, and he was going to stay there to go to school in Zagreb, to a polytechnic school. One of the reasons is that back in Gospić, there was a statue of a guy by the name, I should say a man, Nikola Tesla, who grew up in Croatia and was born in Yugoslavia, and he went to a technical school. So Danny thought he would go to a school in Vienna eventually. That never happened. But
World War II comes along.
okay, I have 2 brothers that go in. This is my brother Emil, and he becomes a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne. I don't know if that shows on his shoulder or not, but he goes into the 101st Airborne, and he is part of the invasion of D-Day on June 6, 1944. He ends up marrying a girl in England, and they have a family, and eventually come to Red Lodge. She didn't ever like Red Lodge. Wanted to move to California. I thought she'd get discovered by some Hollywood director or something. That never happened. But as soon as she could, she got my brother and the kids, and they got into a car and drove to a place called Malibu and never came back. So
Who's running the store then?
by By that time, my dad and his two brothers, yeah.
Who was running the store?
Well,
Yeah.
my dad, and Pete was kind of the clerk behind the store. Very bashful, very quiet. And my dad was the extrovert. He'd go out and get the orders and go from door to door and have a lot of, he just had a lot of fun just talking to people. He always was the big salesperson in the family.
You were a young man then. You're a teenager then?
Yeah.
You and Bob.
Bob was, 2 years older, I guess, or 3. When World War, this picture, you were born in 29?
28.
28.
And I was sorting, I was about 12 years old when my godfather took me and he made me sort bottles.
Okay, well, Bob just said he was about 12. I was growing up, remember most of the invasion came. I remember the headlines, D-Day invasion in big red print in the Gazette.
You can remember that. Here's an ad that Pepsi had at that time during the war.
Well, yeah, trying to get troops with a 6-pack of Pepsi. They had a lot of fun with it. In 1941, my dad and my brothers built an addition to our old plant, and might come up here. And this was the plant's still there, but it's now the city fire department. And they've covered that up, but that was our new building. We made the syrup on the second floor, and the bottling equipment was on the first floor. The syrup ran down into a machine that bottled the soft drinks. There's a picture of my dad with the sign that we had over the door. And that on the, Pepsi Cola was a big hit. It was 12 full ounces, twice as much. Isn't that Taylor Brown in the room? Can I sing the KGHL commercial?
Yeah.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too, that's the drink for you. Nickel, nickel, nickel. And that went on for many, many years. And I remember the day my dad and I came to Billings. Have I got time to tell that? Anyhow, I remember coming down and again with him to a business called Northwest Auto. It's about where the library's parking lot is now. And we went up the stairs, and I'm carrying this big record. It's about 18 inches wide. And we asked the clerk behind the counter where the KGHL station was. It was owned by the same people that had the Northwest Auto, and they directed us over. When they put the needle on that record, we thought, wow, now we got a jingle. This is 1939. They keep that jingle until 1949, and then they finally change it. But what it was, the radio stations didn't want short jingles, they wanted full minutes. And we had to convince KGHL that 15 seconds will be okay. So we got 4 for the price of 1. And but as I said to Taylor, everybody had a radio, and so that was a way to advertise. Then we had in all the theaters, we had those trailers that we paid to have a show, and then we had a cartoon. Business was good. We sold all we could make, and we'll step back. My dad and my brothers buy a lot on Main Street in Red Lodge in 1922, and that building on the next to us now the Blue Ribbon Bar. And my dad and his brothers built this building. They put a huge basement in it. Main floor is for the grocery store, and then the top floor, as I said to Nancy, was for a dance hall. Red Lodge had 4 dance halls, or more. And every Saturday night, wherever the Night Owls played, and Bob will tell you, you couldn't get a better band. Dance floors were a big thing, and it had a big kitchen in the back for people who would rent the building for a dance. We didn't put the dances on, we rented it out to different groups. And eventually my dad rented that out or gave it to the Moose Lodge to hold their meetings. And then he became very active in the lodge. But I remember going up and they had the rugs and the chairs, kind of like what we're in now. And they'd walk around with their purple hats, and we used to make fun of them. But
Who taught you to dance with it?
oh, in a sec here, we lose the store in 1931. I can remember them talking about that later in life. That the bank came up and said, we need the keys to the front door. It later becomes the Marcello grocery store. One of three grocery stores. Mike asked me a question. The Yugoslavian boys, and Bob, you were one of them. When we went to dances, there were 7 girls in a family named Salona. And if the music started, they came over and grabbed you. They made you do the foxtrot, and they made you make a square and don't look at your feet, and I'll dance with you all night, right, Bob?
Right.
And those 7 girls had their own bowling team, and they were to behold. But they taught every kid in what do we call a stag line, all the boys on one side and all the girls. But I can still remember her telling me, "Don't look down, look at me." And we do a little square, and then we danced to the slow dances. I can remember there was one called
That's the
Starlight.
ones you liked is the slow ones.
Yeah, well, you could dance a slow one. But yeah, those girls taught every kid to dance that wanted to, and eventually we all got to be pretty good dancers. And the girls and Bridger and all around said, "Oh, just have those Red Lodge guys come down and dance with us." And we kind of thought we were pretty cool that we could go around that dance floor with the greatest of ease. But it's all because they were Italian girls and they had a lot of fun. Every Italian boy played the accordion, and they made wine, and when you went out with the Italian girls, you got an education on that. It was a growing experience even as a 15, 16-year-old girl. I had a guy with a girlfriend and she didn't say the backseat of a car, but I can still say that, and Bob would agree.
Is this true, Bob? It's true.
Also, those Finlander girls. Were
Yeah, Bob marries a Finlander. Nothing against Dorothy Lou, but I thought some of those other kids had a lot more fun. And this is Red Lodge in 1900 or a little more. It really didn't change at all. Try to keep this short. Across the street from the Pepsi plant was a big building. It was built by the Lurkine family for a brewery. And it was called Red Lodge Bud, and they made keg beer. We had either 14 or 17 bars. So bar business was good. The Lurkine business doesn't last too many years. It moves out, it sits empty, and finally a group of men put a canning line in and they can peas. Anybody hear of Red Lodge peas? Well, they get they contract farmers down the valley to grow the peas, and then they come down and put the peas in the truck, and then usually about 8 o'clock at night, the trucks would bring the peas up, and every girl, wife, whatever wanted a little money, bring your chair and a cushion, and you could come down and sort peas, and to work about anywhere from 11 to 2 in the morning. And some of the cafes stayed open all night, and there was quite a bond. I just went an obituary this morning. Mr. Hugh Rittine, his big thing in life was working at the cannery. We call it the Peary. And that was there. Then across the street, Bob would say, we had a place called Little Italy, and this is all Italians. And then you came up, we had a big creamery. And every Saturday, all the farmers would bring in their milk and for processing, and eggs for the wife to go shopping. And they made ice cream, and they had ice still there. The building's still there, and they still deliver milk out of that creamery. Uptown, we had a big store. Remember anybody remember Sawyer's? Well, Sawyer's had a great big store on Main Street now. Gerbler and Kirsch. Next street, or next block, they had a big Safeway store, really quite large, and employed a lot of checkers and every high school kid in town would be a stalker. And then the Orcello brothers bought our old building. We had 3 drugstores. We had 3 bakeries, all owned by Italians. And the big fun was, Bob and I remember, the bars all had their own little niche. The Finns went to their bar, the Italians went to their bar. I hate to use the word hunky, but that's what they called us. And
In Willie, we had 17 bars that went down.
yeah, so we went into the bar business. We didn't go into the bar business, but bar business was good for our company. I'll tell you that. If you look at the back of your cover, one of the things is a thing called a siphon, and those were high profit items for our family. Yeah. So the history of the plant, our company, is right on the back of your book. We start out as the Red Lodge. We buy that from Charlie Wilson. We changed the name to Beartooth, which is on the siphon bottle. And then in 1937, we get this drink for a 12-ounce bottle for a drink called Pepsi Cola. Things were tight. You got a 12-ounce bottle and a bag of peanuts for a dime. You could have a good afternoon just for 10 cents. But the siphon, I've got one up here for you to look at after the evening. And we sold a lot of them. The Workers Club, good for 6 cases. We got 75 cents a bottle, and it cost us about 2 cents to make. So how could you not go wrong? So that was a big. Their truck held 40 cases, and do I got time? Yeah, there you are, right in time. We had 4 bathhouses, Finlanders, we call them sauna, and everybody in town went to one of the 4, me included, and all my family, brothers and sisters, mom and dad. And we would call the 1, 2, 3, 4 on the phone, and they give us their orders, and they'd want so many bottles of strawberry and grape, and you'd make the order, and then you had a chalk in your pocket, and you'd write on the top, bathhouse number 1, and then number 2, and then Bob, you remember we used to run over there and deliver them and get out of there. Middle of winter, they were always good, about 4 or 5 cases every bathhouse was good, and hated to see them go, but eventually they were all usually in the back of a house, and people, most of them never did do much more than just take your quarter, and you went in and took your sauna, steam, and we usually brought clean underwear, and that was it for Saturday night. And there's our original building at the north end of town. As I said, we sold a lot of cigars, and that little porch, and I used to hang around waiting for my dad. Finally decided to take me back home, and occasionally I'd walk home. That truck held 40 cases, and that's our first load of Pepsi going uptown. And that's our next truck. A year later, we got enough money to buy a brand new truck. Can you believe that truck? We went from a 40 case truck to a 160 case truck. Wow, are we uptown? And we thought we could deliver 160 cases. The back end held all the candy and cigars. And on the bottom of there it says made with Red Lodge water, 99.8% pure. And I said to Paul, where'd you get that? He said, well, Taylor, we had a radio program, Ma Perkins, and they advertised Rinslow soap, 99.8% pure, and he just piggybacked on that. I thought that was, but anyhow, one day somebody said, hey, Mike, what's the other 2%? He never did answer. But I think quickly that was glacier fed. The water from Red Lodge came from the mountains, and it was pure. Can you imagine your pot bill or water bill? They charge you $2 a month for every cold faucet you had in your house. In our business, we use tons of water every day, and they only charge you $2 for every cold spigot you had. It was license to steal, I'll tell you. But that truck was built in Billings, Montana, and it lived. We delivered off of that thing until after World War II. And Bob, you remember that? Got pictures of you standing in front of it. And we always worried about getting over the scales. That was a Pepsi window in downtown Red Lodge.
Remember that one, Willie? That one took national, Pepsi's national advertising.
Yeah, this is what we got in
And it was
Frank.
from Red Lodge there.
And can I tell you quickly, are you guys old enough to hear this? Well, this window is a pool hall called Simpson's. Had about 8 tables of pool or 8 pool halls. God, I hope you can understand what I'm gonna say. But outside the pool hall were 2 signs that said rooms, just rooms. And they had a staircase. Now I said, what's in those rooms? They said, you don't wanna ask. That's the red light district of Red Lodge was right on Main Street. And I never saw anybody in the time I lived there come out of those doors or go through. But all business was transacted up the alley. And that was part of the scene. We had a lot of single men, and the red light district until after World War II was part of the community. And I don't know, other than maybe every mining town had something like that, but we did. But this was a thing. This is my brother Emil, and this is in our new building. Emil's the one that goes in the paratroopers and goes, it's going in, and we went from 24 bottles a minute to 48. We thought we'd really gone uptown to bottle it. This is Bob and my brother Danny, and that was a killer truck, but he came to Billings 4 days a week for years and years until the truck wore out.
So Bob's working for Pepsi then?
Yeah, he's 17 years old, weren't you, Bob?
What's that?
You're about 17 when that picture's taken?
No, about 15, I think.
Yeah. But every day they had 2 guys, a driver and a helper. And my biggest fear when I learned how to drive that truck was when I went to Laurel, you had to go down under the underpass. And I didn't want to miss a gear, because if you didn't, the truck would roll backwards, I thought. And I'd say, well, babe, just get up this, you know.
Remember when you guys hooked up that smoke bomb in there?
Yeah. I came to Billings and bought a trick thing where you wired the spark plugs up. My brother Emil unknowingly turned the key, and that thing had a big boom, and when it came out of there, he was so mad at me, I thought he was gonna kill me. But yeah, Bob and I thought it was kind of funny. My brother Emil didn't think it was funny at all, but it was called a smoke bomb. We moved to Billings, and this is a ad that we put on in 1954. Welcome to Billings, we are your neighbor. We have a new home. The building's still there. My dad bought some land on 5th and Montana Avenue to build a building, and about the time we were going to build, a trucking company called Garrett built a new building, and their old building's for sale. My dad gets together with Mr. Wallace, we buy the building. Ironically, we still live in the building. I have 2 older brothers, and ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, they were so tight. I said, hey, are we ever going to get into a new building? Yeah, someday. Never did. I'm still in the same building, paid off the 2 widows, and this is our grand opening in 1954, I think, yeah. It doesn't say it, but this is our bottling line. The gentleman is taking the bottles off the accumulating table, and we're getting up speed. Eventually we get 120 bottles a minute, and that was, we got better machinery than what's in that picture.
When did your dad pass?
My dad was killed in a result of a car wreck in Joliet. The accident happened in 1953. I was in the service, and they called me, and the Red Cross told me I couldn't come home, and that he wasn't going to make it. He lives 4 more years. He passes away in 1957 on the coldest day in January. I remember we had to come up home. I was living out of Red Lodge. My 2 older brothers, Danny was 15 years, and I was 13 years old. And I had a lot of fun making these ads up for the Gazette. We had a drink called Pepsi in 16-ounce returnable bottles, and they were a pretty high profit item for the company. Each case weighed 64 pounds, so you pumped up your muscles. And these were the ads I would run for my 2 brothers. They didn't get too active. One was production, the other was in the office. So I made fun of my two brothers with these ads. I just got out of the Marines and they needed help, so this is the Red Lodge guy, Joe Koshock. He's on the far end on the left. And then my good friend Dick Ziegler, myself, and Carl Roundtree. And we were the sales force for our company in 1954. And we covered the town, and we thought we were pretty cute, so. That's my two older brothers as we go along. Dan was the oldest on the far left. My brother Mitch, who Bob would call his very mentor, right? He was past exalted ruler in this room. He sat probably behind us tonight, and of course I'm the little guy on the far side, and taken there about that time. This is the next generation, of course. We're winding down. Of course, that's me, and on my right is my nephew Mitch. On my left is my son Tom. In front of him is my nephew Mike, and on him left is my nephew. His name is Pertz. I hate to tell you, but he had the same name as Danny, and then he was a Billy. And finally, one day, somebody said, "Can't you keep him straight?" And a guy named Steve said, "I think his name is Pertz, which means dirty diapers." So somebody gave him the name of Pertz, right, Mike or Bob? He still goes by, and if you know him pretty well, you call him a Pertz. And if you just know him, you call him Pertz. But Nancy's shaking her head saying, not in good taste, so I guess we'll go there. But that's the next generation, and again, we'll move on. That's me, and that's one of the original machines that we had in 1931. We saved it, and every once in a while I have a warehouse, and I go over and look at that, and were those the good old days, huh, Bob?
That was.
Yeah. And, and then the other time I said, those were the bad old days. I would want them back. But I saved that machine just to go back and look at it once in a while.
Well, Willie, that's the end of our pictures here. You got anything further you'd like to add?
Oh, no, I think it's time to go home. Any questions Bob, or, excuse me, Mike, I don't know how you want to do this, so.
Yeah, let's see.
I'll hand it back to you.
Anybody have questions? We have one.
Yeah. You had said that you became the franchisee for like 6 counties. How many other franchisees covered the rest of Montana?
Oh, good question. Amazing, in 1937, Mr. Jones comes through to sign us up. In 4 years, he has covered the whole state. There are 11 Pepsi bottlers, and you could buy a Pepsi from Broadus to Libby, from Plentywood to Dillon. In 4 years, there were 11 Pepsi bottlers. In that same 4 years, there were almost 500 in the United States. So that really went out in a hurry. What I found out later, I have a Pepsi rep way back. Would you stand up so I can introduce you? Larry Bowers is a past Pepsi employee for the Pepsi buildings, and he now works for the National Pepsi Company. And we had 500 bottlers, and how it was so good is every case of Pepsi signed up, those guys got 2 cents a case commission. Wow, they were making, those 5 guys were making big money. Finally, in 1949, the company said, we're going to quit that because their paychecks were getting up there pretty good.
How many independent bottlers are there in the country?
Okay, well, Nan says, Larry works for the National Company. The Pepsi Company started buying, and so did Coke, buying bottlers up. So now there's probably, 60 of us left, Larry?
Total, there's 87 left if you count all of them.
87 out of 500 are still independent. We're independent. The rest of them, all owned by Larry's company. And we refer to them as the parent company. And Larry, they used to have a word for it, but it was not derogatory. But
Willie, they honored your dad too all of the bottlers at a state convention in Red Lodge.
Yeah, the state bottlers every year, both Pepsi and Coke and everybody would meet every year. And so one year they said, no more little towns. You had to meet where they had trains and airplanes and all. So in the late 40s, my dad said, oh, you owe me one. Let's have the convention in Red Lodge before we shut this all down. And they did. And let me tell you, we had a supper club on the end in town called the Frontier Club. My dad got every Italian girl that could dance, or anybody, and said, come on to the Frontier Club. We've got a big band. We've got a lot of single guys from all over, salesmen from Minnesota. Those guys, they brought out crap tables. They brought out slot machines. I mean, let me tell you, those guys want to wait 10 years still talking about, oh God, I went to Red Lodge for this convention. And this girl danced my feet off, and I remember some of those guys were taking their shirts off. They were wringing wet. And I think the band played until 4. And that's the end of the small town conventions. After that, they had to be on the railroad or have an airplane service. But yeah, he went out with a blaze of glory and putting on that convention. I can still remember him talking to all the girls in town, the Italian victory girls. Come on up, we got a big dance party and bring your husbands and we'll dance the night away, and they did. But I'm gonna hang this up on one thing, and a lot of you remember a thing called the Festival of Nations. Yeah. In the early 50s, a group of school teachers and all said, let's have one day for each nationality. And they did, and every year they'd rotate the days. But it went on for a number of years, and finally, as things went along, it faded away, and I don't think they even have it anymore. But it was quite a popular thing in its day, and it was a time for it to be there. And I remember everybody took a lot of pride in getting their costumes, and the Civic Center was where they held everything, and that would be about it. Any questions? I shut up here. Yeah.
The wonderful book that you've donated to everybody. How did that come about?
Well, somebody said, you know, Willie, if you don't get off your butt and write all this down, it's going to go away. And you knew your dad, you knew your family. So there was a friend of mine in California named Bob Stoddard. And he kept saying, you're going to write that book someday? And I said, yeah. So a couple of years ago, I said, Bob, I think it's time for me to start gathering pictures, background, and maybe someday we'll get it. So Bob, who's an old friend of mine, said, let's do it. And the book came pretty much because he would come to Billings. We'd go to Red Lodge, interview everybody up there, went to the civic centers and all. So Bob, I talked to him on the phone about every week or so, and but he's the one that put the book together. I just provided the stories and the pictures. If he hadn't pushed me to get going on it, I probably would have said next year and next year and next year. But I got to give credit for the fact that he finally convinced me to let's do it and get from there. Anything else? I rattle off here.
Thank you for the book.
Well, thank you for allowing me and my family to come up here tonight. I think I bored you a little long too long, but like I say,
this is a wonderful story, isn't it? And it's been kind of fun because Mike, first Nancy, they're all saying, no, you need to get my dad to tell this story and this story. It's so neat to find a family that's so much together and so much together over almost 100 years. I think this is a real American story that you just heard, and one that we can all be proud of. Now the next thing I want to do is get Bob and Willie to sit down in a chair and tell me more about these Italian women. And I want to get it recorded. This is something that should be kept for history, I think.
No, I think the trouble is a couple of them are still alive, and it's kind of tough to look at the husband and say, yeah, I can't. Yeah, old Romana and I, yeah, we got to know each other pretty well. But anyhow, No, I think that best left unsaid. It was a good time had by all, and but growing up in Red Lodge was a lot of fun. And let's give you a last. Can I do this?
Well, of course.
I'm going to give you two names, and maybe you can make a little project out of it. There was a man named O.P. Shelley. Does anybody ever hear that name? Okay, O.P. Shelley. We had two newspapers. Pick a Journal and the Carbon County News. Carbon County News is still there. It's right on Main Street by the bank. And O.P. Shelley got an idea to build a highway from Red Lodge to Cook City. And he formed a group, and they got a hold of a guy named Burton K. Wheeler. Does that mean anything?
Yes.
He was a U.S. Senator in Washington, D.C. And that group of guys from Red Lodge, led by O.P. Shelley, went back to D.C., convinced Burton K. Wheeler to take a legislation that they put together to get about $4 million to build the Red Lodge Cook City Highway. Is that interesting? You want to hear more?
Yes.
Okay. So Congress allows $4 million or some dollars for a highway from Red Lodge to Cook City. And they let the bid out, and they built it on two sides, one from Long Lake, Twin Lakes. Anybody familiar with those parts? And that crew starts working on that side. On the Red Lodge side, they had a company out of Boise called Morrison Knudsen. Doesn't mean much to you, but Morrison Knudsen were going to build the Red Lodge side. And rather than have the workers go back and forth to Red Lodge, you build a camp way at the far end of the valley, and some maps will show the MK camp where the workers lived during the construction of the Cook City Highway. And I can remember reading, they brought these big steam shovels like they used in the Panama Canal. They brought them to Red Lodge on freight cars and then disassembled them and then put the tracks back on and drove them up to what's now the switchbacks. And I remember my dad, we had a movie actress named Mae West, and they had a real sharp curve. So we went, well, we'll call that the Mae West curve. And
She wasn't Italian either.
she wasn't Italian. But anyhow, they tried a lot of names. They said, we're going over the top and everything. And then Red Lodge had no place for people to live or stay when they came in 1936. So the Red Lodge City Council, in its wisdom, said, we'll build a place called the Tourist Place. See, we're getting some. I keep screwing that up.
No,
Burned up the mic.
So anyhow, the city of Red Lodge says, okay, the city council, so they built 37 cabins on some land that the city owned, and they said to the people, if you want to work on the cabins, we'll give you credit on your water bill or your taxes or whatever. So everybody in town went up, painted the roofs, did everything they could because they were getting paid not directly, but deducted off of their water bill or taxes. So then ended up with 37 little single room cabins on the end of town. I remember my brother and daddy, we could have bought that thing for over $30,000. We said that was more than we wanted and own a bunch of property. So some fellow named Brittner came in, he called it Fountain Park. And I think, I don't know how much those cabins sell for today, but you got to have the whole bunch for $500 a cabin, and now they're very popular with buildings. There are people from even California buy one and sit on them, but they're pretty crude. But Red Lodge had there was only one motel when I grew up, and it's called Harley's, still there, and built out of cheap cardboard or plywood. And then the big thing that happened as I moved away is that they finally built the ski run as we know it today. Overnight, 3 motels come up, still there. Pollard Hotel gets remodeled. Red Lodge gets a second life in the winter. You got the Cook City Highway. I still remember the buses, and you see those buses around. They would meet the train, as we saw earlier, and bring the tourists from Red Lodge over the Cook City Highway, and they'd take them to a hotel called Canyon. It's been burned down now, but the buses would take tourists up there and then they would come back to Red Lodge and get another load of tourists. They did that all summer. I drove one of those buses one day. They were horrible. They call them gear jammers. I drove one, top speed, 45 miles an hour, no power steering. I said, that was one time and I wouldn't want to do that again. Those guys drove those buses. And if you want to see them, they're still, I think, 5 or 6 in Red Lodge. They put them in parades once in a while. Maybe some of you have seen their buses, but they've restored them, and they're now collector's items. But and the last thing, I'll shut up. I keep saying that. Somebody was smart enough in 1929 to start a rodeo, and on the 4th of July started a parade. The parade's still going. The 4th of July rodeo is still going, and I couldn't wait as a kid to go up, and Bob and I would sneak in on the fence and sit around the chutes and holler at Turk Greeno and what was his name, Lindermans. They were those Lindermans bought a bar downtown and made the swinging doors. If any of you remember, that was not a place where you wanted to go. I mean, those cowboys, they'd throw, just like in movies, swinging doors, and you'd look out, and here comes some drunk going flying out of the door. And fortunately, that bar had something so unique. Instead of set of tunes, Mr. Cornelia put a trough of water that ran along the bar. So when you put out your cigar or whatever, you just let it go. And Mr. Cornelia and his family, and I'll tell Nancy on this one, they were so successful in the bar business, they would loan money to the bank. And I remember they'd say, "Oh, Harry Cassidy's over at Crest Wyman's house getting some." She had a shoebox full of money, and she'd say, "Okay, Harry, how much you want? And here's the interest." And next morning he'd go down and open the bank and loan money and come back and pay her. And yeah, those Italians, they were good. They were good people. I mean, I have nothing to say about the Finns or the other one, but they knew how to run a business. And can I shut this one up? Never could figure out why the sheriff never bothered the Italians. You know? Finally found out from my mother. Every year, Johnny Albert's got a new Buick car. And somebody, where did he get that new car? Well, Dominic Castellano would get him a car, take the old one back, and the sheriff had a nice new car for home. And that's how they kept from getting, what do you call, knocked off. And that was it. If you get the old papers, you find out who didn't pay the sheriff off, I guess.
Let's give Willie another.